I work as a paediatrician in Cambridge, and uh, I probably ended up doing children's hearing health about 20 years ago. And it was initially, I was able to see that there was a crossover with some of the children I was seeing. So in my general paediatric clinic, so I would see children in the hearing loss clinic, and I would see children in the general paediatric clinic. And whilst we were doing a reasonable job at the children that needed cochlear implants or behind the ear hearing aids, I was able to see that this huge group of children who have temporary hearing loss from a condition called glue ear, where everybody was saying, oh gosh, watch these children are taking up a lot of the system time. And there was a lot of watchful waiting built in into that system, so that we could see if it cleared up on its own. And and it was that group that I then became interested in, because it was that group where it seemed that they would end up back in pediatric clinics at some point, with people wondering or querying whether they had attention deficit problems or speech and language problems or learning difficulties, and would ask a pediatrician to see them. And you would look back and go, oh, they had a bit of temporary hearing loss there, hearing loss again, every time they had a cough or a cold, or possibly after an ear infection, an acute ear infection, they would have this lingering difficulty hearing afterwards. And it's really interesting that the World Health Organization prioritizes hearing, because when they calculate it, get down to the basics, then they've worked out that if you improve the hearing of a, in any country, if you improve hearing services in any country and serve more people who can't hear as easily, then you will improve people accessing education and accessing work, and you will increase the economy of a country. So that will have a huge impact on the UK, and it will have an even huger impact on lower or middle income countries. And that's why it's a priority area. And really interestingly, I went to a wonderful presentation for ear, nose and throat surgeons that was talking about how the greatest attention to hearing loss would be one of the least expensive and most effective ways to improve human health and happiness, as it happens. And then you might be aware, so I'm a paediatrician, so I'm quite focused on children. And at the moment, there has been a big inquiry over the last 2 to 3 years. And that's because in Scotland, someone made a complaint against a hospital that their child had been diagnosed very, very late and missed out on many opportunities and had speech and language difficulties because of that. It led to a review in that hospital, and they found that 155 children had wasted time. I mean, I was going to say had failed, and I feel so bad for the people that work there, because of course it's not really a reflection of the people that work there, it's the system. So it's interesting that then the government decided that it was such a big problem in that one hospital that it warranted looking at other hospitals across the UK. And in fact, it was a problem across the UK that children were not being diagnosed early enough and were not accessing an early intervention. And that they were being left with life-changing consequences as a result. And of course, this is bad, but it's quite an interesting time for paediatric audiology, because what we're able to see is that we've got paediatric audiology being right at the top of everybody's consideration. So the government then asked the head of the Paediatric Association, the Royal College of Paediatrics and Child Health, and asked the head of that association to give recommendations about children's health. So that was done at the end of last year. And then another paper was written this year, which said, is anyone listening? Children's hearing services need a radical overhaul. So hearing services have risen to the top of the pile, and we've now got people thinking about what hearing services need to look like. And I hope that that changes what hearing services are like for everybody. But it's interesting that it's no longer at the bottom of the list. So it was always at the bottom of the list because generally people don't die of hearing loss, and that means that it's never the most crucial problem that everybody's trying to firefight. But it's interesting that we've now got an opportunity. I think that's the interesting thing. And then as a paediatrician, I was seeing this overlap with attention deficit problems, lots of people being asking about whether a child had attention problems. And of course, if you've got hearing loss, then it's very hard to attend when you can't hear properly. And then some of those children can even be asked for autism assessments because they appear to be in a world of their own or not answering to their name and wanting things in a more routine way so they understand what's happening. And so this hearing loss gets very muddled with other diagnoses, and these children can sometimes ping across different services. And the most interesting thing is that when you look at school hearing screening in this country and across Europe, 1 in 10 children who are starting primary school in that very first reception year, 1 in 10 have glue ear. And we know that very consistently across Europe and the UK. And I think the really important bit that isn't as obvious to people within the system maybe is that you can have 2 children with exactly the same hearing loss, and they can have completely different understanding of speech or be able to cope with background noise. And the reason for that is that as children are developing, they're developing certain skills, and one of the skills is learning to listen to one person speaking when there is background noise. Now, as adults, we are very aware of this, and when we go, I've just been to a conference today, and almost any of the meetings that I go to now, there is very good acoustics, and I get to use a microphone, because we understand how important it is for everybody to listen well so that they can learn well. But classrooms are absolutely not like that, and the children are coping with a lot of background noise, and they can't pick out, they can't learn how to hear in background noise until around the ages of 13, 14, 15. So you've got a developmental stage where children will be at different areas of how much they're developed in that area. So you might have 2 children with exactly the same hearing loss, and one might be able to have learned the skill of being able to pick out hit someone speaking in background noise, and someone to hear almost nothing in background noise because developmentally they haven't reached that kind of level yet. So in summary, children who can't hear well, if they're straining to listen and all their cognitive energy is going on trying to listen to someone, they don't have much left for understanding or committing that to memory. So that auditory fatigue causes cognitive fatigue, and that sometimes can be lost in the system because we're just doing the audiograms and not always thinking about what that child needs at school functionally for them. And I think that's probably what worries me a lot. And then, of course, in other countries, because it's children with lots of coughs and colds, if they're very prone to getting coughs and colds or have poor nutrition, which means that their immune system finds it harder to cope with lots of coughs and colds or ear infections, they can get this kind of mucus and fluid building up behind their eardrums kind of repetitively. And there's some beautiful research in Australia which shows that looking at the indigenous population who have a higher incidence of temporary hearing loss in children, and they have been able to show very clear relationships between having glue ear early and having speech difficulties, and it affecting how well they do at school, and it affecting how much they can do at work. And actually, interestingly, even there's more young people in the criminal justice system who've got glue ear. So they've managed to plot out that trajectory. And then, of course, there's children with Down syndrome or cleft palate who are particularly prone to this condition. And what we do for glue ear is we either hold on and watch to see if it will start to clear up on its by itself. And this is just fluid and mucus that is building up behind the eardrum after a cough or a cold that hasn't quite cleared itself. And if you wait for a long period of time, so 9 out of 10 cases will be cleared up after a year if you leave them long enough. But of course, you don't need to be a paediatrician to know that if you leave a child not hearing very well for a year, that it might affect their speech and language and development and communication, and how they learn listening skills and how they learn auditory processing skills, and how they're managing to learn during that time. So watchful waiting is something that people try not to wait too long with glue ear now than when I first started. And so grommet operations are one of the most common outpatient child operations that happens across the UK. It's an operation where a child is put to sleep for 15 minutes and a little cut is made in their eardrum, and that mucus and fluid is sucked out from behind the eardrum, and a very small hollow tube is put across the eardrum to help aerate that middle part of the ear. And then the eardrum slowly heals behind it and pushes it out. And you sort of cross your fingers at that point that the child's had a chance to grow up a little bit, and maybe their anatomy's got a bit bigger and less likely to be quite so blocked up with the next cough and cold. And hearing aids, behind the ear hearing aids, it would be possible, but it's quite hard for an audiologist to match the fluctuating loss of glue ear, because your glue ear might clear up a little bit and be less bad, and then you have your next cough, cold, or ear infection, and it gets worse again. So it can go very up and down, and so it would require lots of hearing appointments for you to be able to match that loss well with a hearing aid. So that can be challenging. And just at the point when I was worrying about the children that I was seeing in my clinics, I decided that I would look at how long children on average waited by the time they had seen somebody, gone for their first hearing test, waited for 3 months, gone for a second hearing test, and then been referred on to an ear, nose and throat specialist, and then been placed on a grommet operation waiting list. And so it was taking children on average 12 months, so a year, to go from this child can't hear very well to let's do a grommet operation. And that's because you're asking for 5 clinical encounters in the meantime. So just at that point where I'd realised that children were waiting a year, and this was before COVID, because the waiting list got slightly worse after COVID, one of my own children happened to have glue ear. So I have 5 children because I married another paediatrician. I think that was the problem. And my 4th child got ear infections regularly, and she wouldn't respond if you called her name, and she stood very close to the television, and her sister knew to read her a book that close. And then actually it turned out that even if all of your friends in the hospital were ENT surgeons, that it still takes about a year to get through the system to have a grommet operation. And I think then I saw it from a parent's point of view, which gave me another perspective. And I saw how hard things were for her, and that there was so much waiting within the system that maybe we could utilise to support children. And I thought the best thing to do would be to use a bone conduction soft band, which I think you're probably all familiar with. It's a type of hearing aid that takes sound and turns it into a vibration and sends the vibration across the bones of the skull, doing the work of the eardrum, really. So sending that vibration all the way across the bones of the skull directly to the inner ear or the cochlea, and the cochlea is working well. It's behind the eardrum where all of the glue is sitting. So even though these hearing aids look a little bit like, make you look a bit like an 80s tennis player, and even though they're a little bit tight, and even though they only provide hearing on one side when we actually know that both sides might be better, it didn't matter. I was thinking, we've got a lot of children who are ending up with sequelae further down the line, difficulties, and we could support them with something like this hearing aid, and we could give them out. And then I was quite excited about this. So I told my colleagues, and they said, what a waste of your time. Don't do it. So I was pretty crushed by that. And the reason was, these hearing aids at the time in Cambridge were the £3,000 hearing aids. And so we're talking about 1 in 10 children. And they were saying, even if you prove it, who is paying £3,000 for the NHS to buy these for children, or for the parents? The parents can't afford £3,000 either. So that crushed my soul. So I went out to an electronics store and asked the guy behind the counter, how much is a little transducer that changes sound into vibration? And it turned out that was £10. And it turns out that if you go back and you sort of use YouTube, you can actually build something yourself that kind of works. But it's hopeless, and it has lots of wires that could strangle children, and it's got a pad that you have to hold on manually with your hands onto the side of your so hopeless. I mean, it's hopeless. It's the most ugly thing you could possibly want. But it was £15 all in all, and it was possible. So that changed things. And then I'm going to cut the story short and say that after a long time looking, then at the time, and we're talking about 10 years ago, these were emerging onto the market for cyclists. So these were headphones that were being sold specifically to cycling shops. And the reason is that you could wear these, and they fitted under a bike helmet. They hooked over your ears. They didn't cover your ear canal. They sat on the cheekbone in front of your ears. And then you could pair them with your phone, and you could listen to your trainer through your phone, but you still had your ears open to be able to hear traffic sounds. So it was almost like having 4 ears. So I researched which is the best one of those, and thought, well, what we could have that a child is wearing, I'm not sure how easy it is to see in those photos, but you could have a child wearing a headset, and instead of it being paired to a phone, it could be paired to a microphone, and then they could hear the teacher speaking, or the speech and language therapist, or the parent reading a story. And alternatively, it could be what it was originally designed for, which was the headset Bluetoothed to a device, a phone, or a tablet, or a computer, and that child could do some enriching activities to enrich their speech and language, to enrich their listening skills, to enrich their reading skills. And we could support children while they're waiting. And sorry, it's a better slide showing both of those things. So on the first photograph, potentially in a classroom, and then on the second photograph with the microphone, the teacher's microphone turned off, and instead the headset paired to a device, which means that they can work on their speech and language. And so the first piece of the first thing I wanted to do was to research to see whether these headphones were any good, and I was very unsure about what that would show. So I did it sort of slightly secretly on a Sunday for about 2 years, so trying to get children who had glue ear, who agreed to come to a different audiology appointment on a Sunday, to be tested with and without the headphones. And actually, the interesting thing was that it worked. Yeah. So I wasn't really expecting that. Actually, I wasn't expecting it to work on each child, which is what it did. So it became statistically significant quite easily. And this is a study a slide that I threw in to say that when you're doing studies, it was a lot of work. So I definitely felt like I was struggling to be able to hold work life and home life, and trying to develop this at one point. So I did have several times where I sat on the stairs at 2 o'clock in the morning thinking, should I carry on? And then after I'd got that very first set of results, I wanted to go to Australia. And the reason I wanted to go to Australia is because they are very well known for how good their research is, particularly in glue ear. They also were holding a conference that happens once every 2 years, which was into glue ear, interestingly. And it was a very well-known international conference. So I said to my husband, I have to go to that conference. I promise I will never ask you again, but I need to go. I can't miss the children for all that time. So we're going to have to get out a bank loan and put them all on the plane, and they're going to have to all come with, and you're going to have to come with me so that you can look after them. And then I need to go to this conference. So God bless my husband, and somehow I'm still married to him. But he said, okay, all right, since it's just the once. So we would go to on the left-hand side there, that's the 5 children coming with us, and we took them to see a few things. So they couldn't believe their luck at coming to Australia, and went to the conference and presented my findings. And I wanted to know whether they had something better, whether this was any good, whether this was worth me spending all my energy on. And the answer was yes. It is probably worth you. In fact, one of them said, we can, we'll have a few thousand of whatever you've got. So I was thinking, all right, I'll go back and build it. But the other problem that happened in Australia was that someone said, could you come next year and speak in Sweden? So that's the middle. So actually, having promised my husband I would only ask him if we could go somewhere once, the middle set of photographs on the top and the bottom is me speaking in Sweden and all the kids coming. And then on the right hand side, top and bottom, is the following year, because when I was in Sweden, then someone asked me if I'd come to Malta the following year. So you can see the children are growing up a bit there. So I've done well to stay married. So then after I realised that the headsets was needed, and by finding out from experts in the field, then I wanted to work on the app. And I won't go into detail, but the app gives speech and language advice for children who have glue ear. It had a little hearing screen on it for parents to check what their child's hearing was doing, how it was fluctuating at home. Audiobooks, because children need to learn to read, and it's very difficult to learn to read when you can't hear the difference between read and bed. And listening games so that they continue to listen, and advice for the parents that was mostly advice. And that came out I built it in 2018, and it was registered as a medical device. I did another study looking at whether children downloaded it and families used it, which 3/4 of them did. And it was free because of a charity partnership, and absolutely no healthcare professionals recommended it. And I couldn't believe that they didn't recommend it. And the reason is that none of us had been trained in anything to do with health apps, and no one knew what to do. And people thought it was a good idea, but they just didn't know how to use all the functions on their own phone. And they just felt like recommending health apps was something that other people did who maybe were a bit more techie. And I ended up realizing that every time I explained about the app, I had to start by saying, this is the reason why health apps can be helpful, so that families can self-manage initially. So it was interesting that, and actually children walk into my paediatric clinics often holding a device that their parents are saying, oh, it'll keep them quiet while I talk to you first, and things. So, and actually, the more we explain to children about how to use an app to look after their own health, they will be able to do that in the future. They're very keen on downloading, and they're doing all the worst things around social media, but to be able to manage a condition themselves might be something that children need to understand in the future, because we're not getting a huge amount more healthcare professionals. I'm going to blow past this in the interest of time, but in my mum guilt, I bought the children a dog, which I don't recommend because this dog was enormous. And I think that that's what happens when you have mum guilt. Sometimes you just think you've got to do things to make yourself into a good parent, and then you provide more work for yourself. So all of this is actually the slide of everything that went wrong. So I mean, the kids still love the dog, and we've still got the dog, so it's fine. But blimey, she looked like she was a cross between a Labrador and a polar bear, and she also didn't appear to have any brain cells, and she also had 7 people trying to train her. So and also you can see at the very bottom there, Prince Andrew decided to come and champion the headsets at one point, and of course he's disappeared in shame. But the what happened then around the app was, at the point where I thought it was all going to fail, when COVID happened, the app suddenly completely took off because 3 months into the COVID pandemic, it was decided that grommet operations would be unable to be prioritised. And there was nothing then for children to have at that point around glue ear. But I put my hand up and said, actually, I can support all of these children because I can send them by post one of these headsets and I can give them details about the app. And then I don't mind following them up remotely. And we did that. And actually, only a quarter of them ever went on to have a grommet operation. And we were able to support them, especially when people were wearing masks and it was hard for them to lip read. We managed to support the children who were all waiting for a grommet operation as lockdown happened. We were able to support them to access online education and also online communication with, for example, family or grandparents. So just to whip through I've done quite a bit of research now, but my 5 main pieces of research. The first one was that the headset provided a 16 decibel improvement on average, and grommets provide on average a 12 decibel improvement. That's according to a Cochrane review, which is an area that we rely on. And then the second research was the app, which showed that 3/4 of families will use an app regularly. The third one was that pit that I was explaining earlier about children with different developmental abilities to hear and background noise. So if you haven't developed that skill and there's a lot of background noise, then the headset can help, and that's for children with normal hearing. So that's got, the reason that we did that was out of interest, but also because there are children with auditory processing difficulties who have normal hearing, and they often are children who've had a lot of glue ear and they struggle to process auditory information easily even after the glue ear has cleared up. So we might be able to support those children even after the glue ear is cleared up if they have some of those difficulties. Then there was the COVID study where we were able to support everybody remotely, and that showed that remote care was possible. And then the COVID study was published, and the BMJ decided to press release it. So it went to several different countries, and that's when there was interest in low-income countries who were contacting me saying, well, we don't have any hearing aids that are easily available or affordable, so we're interested. And so that is the case study of the very first child who tried one on in Malawi, and 3 years later she was failing exams at school. And 3 years later, we followed her up. So we don't follow them up very regularly in Malawi. It's been about every 3 years. But they can self-manage for 3 years. We can follow her up 3 years later. And she actually had realised she was clever, and she was really pleased because the teacher thought she was clever. And then we followed her up 3 years again, and she had become a healthcare professional so that she could help other people how she had been helped. So we wrote her up as a case study. This is just some of the interesting bits about the app. We ended up in COVID adding on a care plan, and that's been quite popular. The care plan was a way for parents to fill out a form which they could share with school, which showed how their child was affected by their hearing loss. and help them to access education. And slowly we got ENT letters back again saying, actually, the family are fine to keep using the headset rather than have a grommet operation. And then that did mean that we could show a cost saving for the NHS. Ooh, what it means is that through that pathway, that child going for their first hearing test, then a second hearing test, then seeing an ENT surgeon, and then maybe going on to an intervention, we might be able to put a nice early intervention. And the reason that that's interesting is the research shows there's two very clear things that make a difference. One is early intervention, and the second one is supporting the family to support the child. So we're hoping that both of those things are. I don't know if you know that the period of time between an idea and a product coming out is known as the Valley of Death, which is the real Valley of Death looks like that. And for some reason, I thought that maybe I could just hop over it short, but actually it was a very long journey in the end, and it was a bit more like that. And I ended up feeling very strongly that I wanted to develop a headset that was affordable, and that was the biggest sticking point with multiple people and caused lots of arguments. People felt like I was very bad at business, which I'm sure is probably true. But I just felt like I needed to stick to the original values that I started with, which was, could we get something that was really affordable for families? So it's currently available for £50 for headset, and the app has been free for the last 8 years, although I am actually struggling at the moment to keep it free. But it has been free for 8 years, and the headset continues to be sold for 8 years. And the reason for that is that I was helped by a company called Raspberry Pi, who decided that they were going to produce this headphone. That little orange box there is the box that Raspberry Pi made and did everything for, and they decided they weren't going to charge me, and that they were going to help me to find a device that was £50, and that includes the little microphone that the teachers wear. And then, of course, because I had a colleague at Adam Brooks, who Chris knows, who had lived and worked in Malawi, she was very keen. This is the first child. I won't go into that because I know we're running out of time. Even when this is the headset that we gave her, 3 years later, she'd managed to repair it when a friend had accidentally trodden on her bag. But you can see how worn the microphone is at that point. She'd worn down any of the writing on any of it. We went to a deaf school. The little child at the back there, we were actually asking them about what they thought about how visible these headsets are compared to how everybody keeps hiding hearing aids. And they said none of them will work with this particular type of loss because they're deaf from birth here. But in fact, that child you can see right at the back there started grinning when we were trying it on. And so his teacher, who was wearing the microphone, turned around so he couldn't lip read and asked him to stand up. And then asked him to raise his hands. And his classmates were amazed. And I think the important bit about this is that for him, he can then access communication, and it meant for him he could access work, and that he might be able to support his family one day. And it was a possible way to potentially not be in poverty, which is what most deaf children are. And this is an orphan who was just delightful, but just sitting very despondent and not talking at all. I don't know if you hear me. Can you hear me a little?
Yes.
Or a lot?
Yes.
Or one? Oh, sorry. So I'll just show you again. Sorry, you probably can't hear it very well. Can you hear me a little?
Yes.
Or a lot?
Yes.
Or one. So you can sort of see that she responds and starts to be really pleased and excited and start to chat and start to talk, which is amazing. But one of the things that we saw in Malawi is boxes and boxes of donated hearing aids that are not being put on anybody. I mean, it's devastating because if you look at the figures globally, 80% if you take all the children who are deaf, 80% of them globally will never have any hearing support. So it's just something that exists for people who can afford it in high income countries. And then you see boxes and boxes of donated hearing aids sitting in the audiology clinic in Malawi, unable to be given out because they can't find the tubing and they definitely don't have the batteries, and no one can afford replacing the batteries for £1 or £2 every 2 weeks. And they just sit there, all these. And we were so determined not to be like that, that the bone conduction headsets and the microphone are both chargeable, like you would charge your mobile phone. So we are actually still able to keep the costs down. We went to Malawi so that we supported their economy and found a very simple charger that allows charging of both devices and a little bit left if you want to charge your phone, but it stores the solar power during the day. So you can give that with the device and still keep it under £100. And they were all very innovative in Malawi, and actually helped us to think about what implementation looked like. This is one of the first children in UK who used the headset. So at the bottom there, you can see that's when she was younger, and she wore it to access education, and her speech and language wasn't so good, and it got better when she was wearing the headset. And she's now been in some films, would you believe it? So she definitely got her confidence back. But the very exciting thing about her is that she would tell her friends that this was Harry Potter's extendable ear that could hear through doorways. And so perhaps when I finish the slides, and I'll show you that we then produced little ear coverings that went on the microphone, and we really leaned into making it a really fun product that looks like Harry Potter's extendable ear. And in fact, it worked really well for younger children, where we could, if the microphone had a little ear covering on it, they would say, you could tell them your ear is going to go and listen over here, and it would be easier for that child to understand if they were littler or had learning difficulties. So it was brilliant. So children are so innovative. And she and I, at 12 years old, she wrote in the British Medical Journal as the first author, which is amazing. And so
Hello,
this is
my
her
name.
explaining it. But again, I don't want to use too much time. This is a team that trialled it in a Bangladesh camp. And the World Health Organization have become interested in some of this work. A team from Addenbrooke's have volunteered. So those are all of the people in the blue T-shirts. And we took them out. They either paid for themselves or got a little bit of sponsorship from Cambridge Global Health Partnerships. We raised money just by selling cakes and things. And we went out. And Chris was talking about how terrible this was how terrible the queuing up for petrol is. So we would have to pay somebody to sleep in the van overnight to sit in the queue. And we went to 4 different very rural locations, and they were all waited patiently. And we got through 1,000, just under 1,000 children in a week, and saw some interesting pathology. And we were able to fit bone conduction headsets to those that needed it. Here are some of them. There's some wonderful stories about some of them, but I'll save that for later. And we gave out the headsets for people to continue using in Malawi and giving out to those people that needed it. These are the ear coverings that were equally successful in both Malawi and in the UK. So the kids who've heard of Harry Potter love leaning into that, and then some of the younger kids who needed help understanding it improved. So there's ongoing work in Malawi. We make sure that we do provide behind the ear hearing aids as well. That's the charger, the solar powered charger that we give out for people who have no access to electricity in their home, and that gives them both the headset and the microphone can be charged at the same time, and a reading light, because once you can hear, you can start to learn to read. These are important children who that little kid on the left there, one of our criteria was you must come with an adult, and he came on his own at 7 years old without an adult. but he desperately needed something to help him hear. And so he came back 10 hours later with grandma, who was delighted. And actually, there was a teacher that brought 11 of her students on bikes who couldn't hear, and cycled them for about 3 hours. And she has been amazing. And again, for the interest of time, I will just make sure that we start to wrap up. So thank you very, very much for listening. And I will stop the presentation so I can speak to you all.
Tamsin, that's absolutely fantastic. I'm sitting here and I now, although it was mute, I was cheering. I was so euphoric about your determination, your absolute inspiration as well to help all these children. It's totally humbling, quite honestly, the way you've stuck with it, developed it, etc. I've been looking like mad in the chat to see questions, and I can't see any, whether it's my device, but I think probably like me, we were so gripped with the wonder of how this had all expanded thanks to you and the impact on the children. It's totally phenomenal, quite honestly. So I do apologise, Jill, but there's no questions that have appeared on my screen. So could I ask the first one, Tamsin?
Lovely.
What next?
Ooh, that is a good question.
I thought, dare I ask that? Because
no, that is a great
you're
question.
kind of like ahead of the game all the time. And I'm thinking, kind of what is the challenge at the moment that you kind of are going for? And maybe how can we, in a sense, although a small group, perhaps help you?
Yes, so there is, the headsets they kind of look like that, and they kind of hook over the ears. So this one you can see fits me, and also it's extendable, so it can grow with the child, but it actually is still quite big for a little
for the little
preschool.
So
the next thing is we're sort of halfway in between doing a little preschool headset,
right,
trying to keep it all at the same price. I mean, initially the headsets themselves were 150, and so were the microphones were 150 as well. So to get it down to 50 quid and keep as much quality as we could,
right,
with things like a light on the side that the teacher could see was on, and nice big pads that send the vibration easily, the cartilage and bone. And so we've got little headsets coming out shortly, and then there are lots of different organizations or countries that say they would like to, could they have access to them. And at the moment I am trying to write to governments to say, can you take away the tariff? So because sometimes if you send a box of headsets, they will put on a tax that is more expensive than the box. They can't get in, or it's not worth it to people again. And you just think, oh, we've done all this work to get it down to being affordable, and then we can't send it. So it would be lovely. At the moment, we're reliant on people taking it in their bags when they go abroad. So the next time
take it with them.
Goes,
yes, there are ways.
But so at the moment we're doing it with people. The app I am struggling with because it needs updating. The code is now the code needs updating because it's 8 years out of date, which is a long time for code now. And there's always things you can think to make it better. It would be lovely if the app had, for example, a little emotional and mental health support.
Yes, indeed. Because there's so many connections on that. So
right, exactly. And so that feeling of when I was doing my research, actually, I'm so focused on speech and language outcomes and learning outcomes, but actually about half of the girls are very, very anxious, and the boys are told off a lot.
I can imagine. I can imagine. Yes.
So um, I wish that we'd got that, and there's probably more we could do with supporting. There's probably quite standard speech and language therapy that we could almost start as little tiny courses on the app that people could do first, because accessing a speech and language therapist is also difficult in the NHS. So, and in places like Malawi, there is no speech and language therapist. So, and I think
it gives us a good sort of range of things, Tamsin, that we could. And I've got a question that's popped up that linked really. This is from Marilyn. Could you simply follow the market and do away with the headband? So 2 separate units, 1 for each ear. That's from Marilyn Grazer.
Yeah, that is lovely. I thought about that a lot, actually, because yes, you're thinking like have it just as an actual autistic. So at the moment, it is. At the moment, we've been quite, I suppose, quite lucky, because it's hearing over background noise is the hardest listening situation, particularly for children. So, that thing where if you put the volume on, even on a hearing aid, you can sometimes just amplify background noise, and you still can't hear the teacher, so it's still difficult to concentrate. So there is that. The other thing, in order to keep it, we were very lucky that it was decided that it wasn't a medical device, because essentially it's more like headphones than it is a medical device. And I love that it sits in that space, because if a child needs to go on and have a hearing aid or something much more all the time, then that's what they need. And so I prefer these to sit in the something early on that might help enrichment. It's something that's enough. In Malawi, it has to be more than enough. But in this country, something that is proactive, something you can do as a family, if you can find your 50 quid, to support a child to have some good speech and language enrichment, even if it's for 15 minutes a day, is something. It doesn't. It's not prescriptive. It's not you must wear this till morning till night. It's like, would this help? Does this help for a particular lesson? Does this? And we have like vast amounts of stories about how this kid is going to get kicked out of his tennis club because he's mucking about and he just can't hear. He can't hear the person on the other side of the court. So in fact, the teacher refused, I don't know why, to wear the little microphone, the tennis teacher. So the dad wore the microphone and repeated what the teacher said. and the kid,
oh dear. I've got Marilyn. Marilyn's come back on to say, can I clarify my question? So lovely. Marilyn, do you want to come in directly?
Yeah. Sorry, Cheryl, can I just clarify something first? I'm only Marilyn at the weekends. The rest of the time I'm Mark.
Oh, sorry. I thought you were Marilyn Grazer because it said MG.
That's all right.
I'm sorry.
No, Tamsin, first of all, absolutely phenomenal. Thank you very much for not only the presentation, but for what you've done for children with hearing loss. I particularly work with, across the board, but I'm very keen on hearing loss with children. And I could go on for hours about it, especially those that are deaf from birth and the parents that are deaf not wanting cochlear implants or something like this. That's another story. No, why I particularly say, I bought my wife one of these, shocks, I think they're called, one of the and I wear them as a cyclist. But a year or two ago, because she's very small, so the band originally, then they bought a smaller one out, but then they bought out ones. There's 2 separate ones without that headband around the back, and I know there is because I just bought my friend some for his birthday, and they just one each on each ear. There's no headband around the back.
I see. So interestingly, I started working with shocks, but they were called aftershocks. Do you remember? Is that or have you got just shocks? So about 8 years ago, I wanted to work with them because I really loved their product. But they just felt like so what they didn't want to do was they didn't want to hold one design. and only have that design. Their business model was to switch it up and do something different every 3 years, like you were saying, like have a different design. For the NHS, we needed one design that everybody knew how to operate. And they felt that their business model was to do something exciting every few years and get someone to buy the next one. And they also weren't keen on having it under £100. But they were very good people, and I'm still good friends with them. And actually, I used their products for the very first one, and they agreed to do the mini, which was the mini, because they felt like they could sell that. So that might be the mini that you had. And they came in fabulous colours. So actually, I loved working with them, but they just didn't feel secure about working within the medical space, and they didn't want to. They thought it would be bad business for them to hold a particular design. Then Aftershocks split up, so the founders went separate ways, and it turned into Shocks and Bone Conduction Labs. And in honesty, I haven't been back to Shocks. I have spoken to Bone Conduction Labs, but of course there's a bit of tension between them. And then
it is a very good friend, I bought them for his birthday, but I didn't spend £100.
Oh, good. Excellent. And that was the ones here. Well,
two separate ones. I'm sure they were Shocks.
Good.
I bought them off the big place, where we all buy, because he lives in Kent and I'm up in Suffolk, not far from himself. But yeah, you can get them, and bearing in mind that's the retail price.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
All right,
that's brilliant.
I'll tell you what, it was about £75, and I'm pretty certain they were Shocks. If not, they were just the same. A pair, retailing on that big company that's named after a river. It was £75.
That's amazing. And thank you. I didn't know about that. So I'm delighted to hear about it. And also, I don't actually get any money back from this, because that was the agreement with Raspberry Pi. We were all going to work on it as a social value project and keep it as cheap as possible. And I always have said to all of them, like, we should just push the market to bring the cost down. And if someone comes up with something that's better than what we've got, we should all go and work for them, because it doesn't, we're just trying to provide something, and most children have nothing. So I'm really open. Yeah, I'm not wedded to one particular thing, but I'm really excited to hear it, and really excited to hear that they might have thought about that in particular. And I think we have to be a little bit careful and make sure that all of these have been researched on children who have the condition that we're considering. But I think the space is quite exciting, because all those over-the-counter hearing aids that are popping up and these type of technologies that are coming out mean that people might be able to self-manage themselves. And actually, there are not enough audiologists. There are definitely not enough audiologists in Malawi. There's 6 for 20 million people. And there are not actually enough audiologists in this country either. We've got a deficit for what the service needs. And that's part of what the radical overhaul is needed, right? That everybody's talking about. So we're going to need to think outside the box about these type of things and research them and say, that one might be okay and that one might be okay for whatever cost it is. And I hope we do move towards some self-management, because at the moment, lots of children don't get anything for long periods of time, however well-meaning and how fast everyone's working. There's just not enough of us. But thank you so much.
Can I then please, Tamsin, just say on behalf of all of us, that was the most inspirational thing that I think any of us have probably heard and been, the privilege really of sharing with you your journey and your research and everything. And we all wish you well. And I'm sure every single one of us, if we can help you in any way, we most certainly will. It's the future. It is absolutely future. Bravo, quite honestly.